Imagine, if you will, an era in the United States, not so very distant in the grand sweep of history, when the social and legal landscape for women was almost unrecognizably restrictive by today's standards. Picture a time when the very notion of a woman aspiring to practice law was met not just with skepticism, but often with outright derision and systemic obstruction, when the ballot box, that cornerstone of democratic participation, was a precinct exclusively reserved for men, and when a woman's sphere of influence, her designated realm, was largely, and often unyieldingly, confined to the sanctum of the home. Her ambitions expected to extend no further than domestic duties and maternal responsibilities. Now, against this formidable backdrop of deeply entrenched societal norms and legal limitations, conjure the image of a woman who not only dared to audaciously shatter these formidable barriers one by one, but then, with a courage that bordered on revolutionary, twice declared her candidacy for the highest, most powerful office in the land, President of the United States of America. All before women in most of the nation even possessed the legal right to cast a single vote in a federal election. This is the extraordinary, compelling, and too often unjustly forgotten story of Belva Ann Lockwood. She was far more than a historical footnote. She was a force of nature, a dedicated teacher, a pioneering lawyer, a tireless and eloquent advocate for equality in myriad forms, and a groundbreaking presidential candidate who, through her very actions, forced a reluctant nation to confront its own deeply ingrained prejudices and contradictions. Her life was an unceasing testament to an unwavering resolve in the face of relentless opposition, a pioneering journey undertaken with intellect and grit, which demonstrably helped pave the arduous path for the generations of women who would follow in her wake, aspiring to roles and rights she could only dream of fully realizing. Today, we endeavor to uncover and illuminate the remarkable story of the woman who boldly ran for president when the entire political and social system was meticulously designed to keep her, and all women, silent and sidelined. Welcome to Old Around the World, where we travel back in time to bring historical events back to life. Belva Ann Bennett first drew breath in 1830 in the predominantly agrarian community of Royalton, nestled in upstate New York. Her early life was one steeped in the rustic simplicity and unyielding labor of 19th-century farm existence. Yet, even in these humble beginnings, a keen, inquisitive intellect and an insatiable, unquenchable thirst for knowledge began to set young Belva apart. In an era when advanced education for girls was often viewed as a frivolous luxury, unnecessary for their prescribed roles, or even, in some quarters, as a potentially disruptive influence on their delicate sensibilities, Belva harbored ambitions that stretched far beyond the narrowly defined conventional expectations for young women of her time and social standing. At the tender age of 15, a testament to her early capabilities, she began her career as a teacher, a common, if limited, professional outlet for educated women. Her life, however, soon took a more traditional turn with her marriage at 19 to Uriah McNall, a local farmer. Domesticity and motherhood followed with the birth of their daughter, Laura. Tragically, Uriah died of tuberculosis just a few short years later, leaving Belva a young widow, not yet 23, with an infant daughter to support. Faced with severely limited economic prospects and the powerful societal expectation to either remarry quickly for security or become dependent on the charity of relatives, Belva made a decision that was both courageous and profoundly radical for her time. She would pursue higher education, not as a pastime, but as a means to secure her own economic independence and to provide a future for her child. She enrolled at the Genesee Wesleyan Seminary in Lima, New York, an institution that, while coeducational, still presented formidable challenges for a woman, particularly a widowed mother. Undeterred, she persevered, eventually graduating with honors in 1857. This achievement, in itself, was no small feat, a clear indication of her formidable intellect and unyielding determination. For over a decade following her graduation, Belva Lockwood, she would later marry Ezekiel Lockwood, excelled and distinguished herself in the field of education. She became a respected teacher and, subsequently, the headmistress at several schools, including the Lockport Union School, where her administrative talents shone. Even in these early years, her innate advocacy for equality was strikingly evident. She vociferously campaigned for equal pay for women teachers, astutely observing and challenging the prevailing injustice that saw her female colleagues earning significantly less than their male counterparts for performing the same work with equal, if not superior, competence. In 1868, her life took another significant turn when she married Dr. Ezekiel Lockwood, a progressive-minded dentist, a respected Civil War veteran, and, crucially for Belva's future endeavors, a man who genuinely supported her intellectual pursuits and professional ambitions. The couple, along with Belva's daughter Laura, moved to Washington, D.C., the nation's bustling capital, a city brimming with post-Civil War opportunity, political ferment, and the legal battles that would soon consume Belva's considerable energies. It was here, in the heart of the nation, that Belva Lockwood would truly begin to forge her groundbreaking and historically significant path. In Washington, surrounded by the machinery of government and law, Belva set her sights on a new, even more audacious, and seemingly insurmountable goal, to become a lawyer. But the legal profession of the 19th century was an almost exclusively male bastion, a formidable fortress zealously guarded against female intrusion. Established law schools across the country routinely, and often contemptuously, denied her admission simply and explicitly because she was a woman. The justifications offered were often demeaning, with one prominent law school dean infamously stating that her presence would be a distraction to the male students and that women were not temperamentally suited for the rigors of legal practice. Undeterred by these repeated rejections and the prevailing societal prejudice, Belva persisted with characteristic tenacity. She finally gained admission in 1871 to the newly formed National University Law School, now part of George Washington University Law School, one of the few institutions at the time willing to even consider female students. She diligently completed all the required coursework by 1871, but the university, bowing to pressure from male students and some faculty members who vehemently objected to the prospect of a woman graduating alongside them, unceremoniously refused to grant her a diploma. For 2 long years, the diploma she had rightfully earned was unjustly withheld. But Belva Lockwood was not a woman to be easily silenced, intimidated, or denied what was her due. In a move that perfectly encapsulated her directness and her refusal to accept arbitrary injustice, she penned a characteristically bold and pointed letter directly to the highest authority connected with the university, the President of the United States, Ulysses S. Grant, who served, ex officio, as the head of National University. "Sir," she wrote with dignified force, "I have passed through the curriculum of study in this school, and am entitled to, and demand, my diploma. If you are not going to give it to me, tell me why, and I will take other measures." Whether it was the sheer audacity of her direct appeal, her irrefutable logic, or perhaps President Grant's own underlying sense of fairness, the intervention came. In September 1873, at the age of 43, Belva Lockwood finally received her hard-won law degree. But a degree, however belatedly granted, was not enough. She needed the official right to practice law, to be admitted to the bar. She was initially denied admission to the District of Columbia Bar, with judges citing custom and the perceived impropriety of women in courtrooms. Again, Belva fought back, this time taking her battle to the halls of Congress. After years of relentless campaigning, persistent lobbying, and leveraging every political connection she could cultivate, a bill she herself had painstakingly drafted, titled, "An Act to Relieve Certain Legal Disabilities of Women," was finally passed by both houses of Congress. This landmark piece of legislation, signed into law by President Rutherford B. Hayes in February 1879, specifically allowed qualified women attorneys to practice in any federal court in the United States. On March 3, 1879, Belva Lockwood made history, standing proudly as she was sworn in as the first woman ever admitted to argue cases before the United States Supreme Court. A year later, in 1880, she would indeed stand before the nation's highest tribunal, presenting her first case, Kaiser v. Stickney, shattering yet another formidable barrier and paving the way for countless women to follow. Belva Lockwood's determined fight for her own professional rights was inextricably and philosophically linked to a much broader, deeply held commitment to achieving equality for all marginalized groups. Having so intimately and repeatedly experienced the sting of gender-based discrimination, she became a tireless and eloquent advocate, lending her formidable legal mind, her sharp wit, and her powerful public voice to a wide range of progressive causes that directly challenged the myriad injustices prevalent in her era. Naturally, the burgeoning cause of women's suffrage was paramount to her. She was an active and vocal member of various suffrage organizations, including the National Woman Suffrage Association. However, her pragmatic, often legally focused, and sometimes unconventional strategic approach occasionally put her at odds with other prominent leaders within the movement, such as the more ideologically driven Susan B. Anthony and Elizabeth Cady Stanton, particularly regarding the most effective tactics to achieve their shared goal. Lockwood, ever the lawyer, believed strongly in utilizing the existing legal and political systems, however flawed, to effect change. She, like the controversial Victoria Woodhull before her, compellingly argued that women were already citizens under the Constitution of the United States, and therefore, the 14th Amendment, with its guarantees of equal protection, implicitly granted them the right to vote, a fundamental right that was simply being unjustly and unconstitutionally denied by state and federal authorities. Beyond the critical fight for suffrage, Belva Lockwood was a dedicated and lifelong pacifist, becoming a prominent and respected figure in the burgeoning international peace movement of the late 19th and early 20th centuries. Decades before the establishment of international deliberative bodies like the League of Nations or the United Nations, she passionately and consistently advocated for the peaceful settlement of international disputes through binding arbitration rather than resorting to the horrors of warfare. She represented organizations like the Universal Peace Union at numerous international peace congresses in Europe, arguing eloquently for disarmament and international cooperation. Her profound commitment to justice also extended with remarkable vigor to the cause of Native American rights, a deeply unpopular and often perilous cause for prominent white figures to champion so openly at the time. She courageously took on numerous complex and challenging legal cases representing Native American individuals and entire nations against the United States government, often fighting tirelessly for the enforcement of broken treaties, the protection of tribal land rights, and fair compensation for past injustices. Her most notable and historically significant legal victory in this arena came late in her distinguished career, in 1906, when, at the age of 75, she successfully argued before the Supreme Court on behalf of the Cherokee Nation, winning a landmark $5 million settlement against the federal government, an extraordinary achievement that stood as a testament to her exceptional legal prowess, her perseverance, and her enduring commitment to defending the rights of the oppressed. Throughout her long and active public life, Belva Lockwood continued to speak out forcefully on a wide array of social issues. She consistently advocated for equal pay for equal work, a battle she had first joined as a young teacher fighting for her female colleagues. She also championed dress reform, challenging the restrictive, uncomfortable, and often physically debilitating fashions imposed upon women in the Victorian era, advocating for more practical and healthful attire. She was, in every conceivable sense, a woman profoundly ahead of her time, consistently and courageously pushing the established boundaries of what was considered acceptable, appropriate, and ultimately possible for women in 19th-century American society. As Belva Lockwood solidified her formidable reputation as a pioneering lawyer and a tireless, multifaceted advocate for reform, she prepared to embark on her most audacious, most public, and arguably most symbolic challenge yet: a run for the presidency of the United States. The American political landscape of the 1880s, the heart of the Gilded Age, was a tumultuous and often deeply cynical arena. It was dominated by powerful, entrenched political party machines, grappling with the immense societal transformations wrought by rapid industrialization, the contentious issue of civil service reform amidst widespread patronage and corruption, and the still festering political and social wounds of the Civil War and Reconstruction. And it was, almost without exception, an arena entirely exclusive to men. Women across the vast majority of the nation were still overwhelmingly, systematically denied the fundamental democratic right to vote in federal elections, let alone the then unthinkable prospect of holding significant national political office. But Belva Lockwood, as her entire life had already demonstrated, was not one to be deterred by mere convention, societal disapproval, or seemingly insurmountable legal barriers. In the presidential election year of 1884, a small, newly formed third party, the National Equal Rights Party, primarily based in California and ardently dedicated to the principles of universal suffrage and complete equality for all citizens, took the unprecedented step of nominating her as their candidate for President of the United States. Her running mate for vice president was another dedicated suffragist and reformer, Marietta Stowe of California. While Lockwood had not initially sought or engineered the nomination herself, she embraced it with characteristic vigor, clear-eyed pragmatism, and a profound understanding of its immense symbolic power. Her campaign slogan, simple yet devastatingly effective, cut directly to the heart of the era's glaring injustice and hypocrisy. I cannot vote, but I can be voted for. Her candidacy, predictably, was met with a veritable torrent of ridicule, vitriolic sexism, and outright disbelief from the mainstream press, the established political order, and much of the general public. She was mercilessly lampooned in countless political cartoons, often depicted in absurd, demeaning, or unladylike ways, as neglecting her domestic duties, as an aggressive shrew, or as a comical figure in bloomers. She was largely dismissed by serious political commentators as a mere sideshow, a distracting novelty, or, by more conservative voices, as a dangerous radical threatening the very sanctity of the American home and the God-ordained social hierarchy. Many prominent newspapers refused to even take her campaign seriously enough to report on it fairly, if at all. Yet, through this storm of derision and dismissal, Belva Lockwood persevered. She actively campaigned, a rarity for presidential candidates of that era, delivering speeches across the country and issuing public statements that clearly and forcefully articulated a remarkably progressive and forward-thinking platform for her time. Her platform was a comprehensive call for reform. It demanded full equal rights for all American citizens, regardless of gender, race, ethnicity, or origin, including, of course, the immediate enfranchisement of women through national suffrage. She passionately advocated for temperance, seeing alcohol abuse as a significant social ill. She called for meaningful reforms in the federal civil service system to combat the rampant corruption and patronage of the Gilded Age. She demanded fairer and more just treatment for Native Americans, building on her extensive legal work on their behalf. She supported pensions for Civil War veterans and their families. And, consistent with her lifelong pacifism, she championed the pursuit of international peace through arbitration and diplomacy rather than militarism. She was, in many fundamental ways, articulating a coherent vision of a more just, more equitable, and more peaceful America that was decades, if not generations, ahead of its mainstream political time. In the presidential election of 1884, which saw Grover Cleveland defeat James G. Blaine, Belva Lockwood officially received a scattered tally of around 4,000 to 5,000 votes. The precise number is exceptionally difficult to ascertain with certainty, as many ballots legitimately cast for her were likely discounted, deliberately spoiled, or simply not counted by the all-male election boards and officials who were often deeply hostile to her candidacy and the very idea of a woman on the presidential ballot. Undaunted by the predictable electoral outcome or the continued public derision, she courageously ran for president again in 1888, once more under the banner of the National Equal Rights Party. Continuing to champion her progressive platform and relentlessly challenge the nation's conscience on issues of equality and justice, Belva Lockwood never harbored any illusions of actually winning the presidency in these campaigns. Her audacious runs were not about electoral victory in the conventional, power-seeking sense. They were, rather, acts of profound political theater, meticulously designed to seize national attention for the crucial cause of women's suffrage and broader equal rights. They were intended to shatter the deeply ingrained illusion that politics was, and must always be, an exclusively male domain. By her very presence on the ballot, by her articulate and reasoned campaigning, she sought to prove, unequivocally, that women were intellectually, morally, and temperamentally capable of aspiring to, and indeed holding, the nation's highest office. She forced a national conversation, however uncomfortable and resisted it was for many at the time, about the fundamental role of women in American democracy and public life. Her extraordinary courage, her resilience in the face of widespread mockery, and her unwavering tenacity undoubtedly inspired countless other women, both contemporary and in succeeding generations, and laid crucial, if often unacknowledged, groundwork for the suffrage victories that would eventually follow in the decades to come. Even after her groundbreaking and highly publicized presidential campaigns, Belva Lockwood did not retreat from the public arena or rest on her laurels. She remained a formidable and respected presence in the legal world, continuing her active law practice and her tireless advocacy well into her old age. She was a well-known fixture in Washington, D.C.'s vibrant reform circles, a consistent and unwavering champion for women's suffrage, a dedicated proponent of international peace, and a steadfast defender of the rights of Native Americans. Her energy, even as she advanced in years, seemed boundless, her commitment to the principles of justice and equality undiminished. Belva Lockwood lived long enough to witness significant progress in several of the causes she had so passionately championed for so many decades. She saw a growing number of Western states grant women the right to vote in state and local elections, a tangible sign that the tide was slowly but surely turning. She also saw the international peace movement gain greater traction and respectability on the world stage. However, the ultimate prize of national women's suffrage remained elusive during her lifetime. She passed away in Washington, D.C. in May 1917, at the venerable age of 86, just 3 years before the ratification of the 19th Amendment to the United States Constitution in August 1920, the amendment that finally granted full national suffrage to American women. Poignantly, she did not live to legally cast a vote for president herself, despite having twice courageously and legitimately run for that very office. So what, then, is the enduring and true legacy of Belva Ann Lockwood? She was, without a shadow of a doubt, a genuine American pioneer, a true trailblazer who courageously, and often single-handedly, kicked down countless formidable legal and deeply ingrained social barriers that had for so long confined and restricted women. Her presidential campaigns, while largely symbolic in their immediate electoral impact, were acts of profound courage, remarkable foresight, and brilliant political strategy. They served to normalize, however gradually, the then radical and often shocking idea of women participating at the highest levels of law, politics, and public discourse, forcing a reluctant society to confront its own deep-seated prejudices and inconsistencies. She demonstrably, tangibly paved the way for the generations of women leaders, lawyers, judges, politicians, and activists who have followed in her formidable and often challenging footsteps. Yet, for many years, Belva Lockwood's extraordinary contributions and her unique place in American history were often relegated to the dusty footnotes of historical texts, frequently overshadowed by other, perhaps more conventionally recognized, figures in the suffrage movement, or dismissed by some historians as a mere historical curiosity, a quirky anomaly. Why is such a demonstrably remarkable and impactful figure so often forgotten or marginalized in the grand narrative of American progress? Perhaps her fiercely independent, sometimes confrontational, and always pragmatic style set her apart from the more established, and sometimes more socially conservative, mainstream suffrage leadership. Perhaps her audacious presidential campaigns were too easily dismissed as a novelty, a sideshow, by a society not yet ready or willing to grapple with such a fundamental challenge to its patriarchal foundations. Or perhaps, more fundamentally, it is simply another unfortunate example of the persistent and pervasive gender bias that has historically shaped which stories are told, whose contributions are deemed significant, and whose legacies are truly celebrated and preserved in the collective memory of the nation. Belva and Bennett McNall Lockwood. Her journey was nothing short of an American epic in miniature. A remarkable ascent from the rustic simplicity of a New York farm to the hallowed, male-dominated halls of the United States Supreme Court, a determined escape from the narrow confines of 19th-century domesticity to the audacious national platform of a presidential candidate. She was a woman who, by sheer, unyielding force of intellect, unwavering tenacity, and an unshakable, deeply principled belief in the fundamental American ideal of equality, carved out a path where none had previously existed for her gender. She faced down a legal system meticulously designed to exclude her, a political system largely determined to ignore her, and a broader society steeped in pervasive prejudice against her very aspirations. Yet, at every turn, at every obstacle, she refused to be silenced, refused to be deterred, refused to accept the limitations imposed upon her simply because she was a woman. When established doors were slammed shut in her face, she either found an alternative window of opportunity or, more often than not, through sheer grit and legal acumen, proceeded to build an entirely new door for herself and for those who would follow. Her life was a constant, unremitting act of challenging the entrenched status quo, of demanding, with irrefutable logic and moral force, that America live up to its own noblest professed ideals of liberty, justice, and equality for all its citizens. Belva Lockwood may not have won the presidency in an electoral sense. She may not have single-handedly, in her lifetime, secured the vote for all American women. But her contributions to the cause of equality and justice were undeniably profound, far-reaching, and foundational. She proved, beyond any reasonable doubt, that women could not only comprehend the intricate complexities of the law but could master it, practice it with distinction, and skillfully wield it as a potent tool for achieving justice and social reform. She demonstrated, through her articulate campaigns and her substantive platform, that women were not only capable of engaging in sophisticated political discourse, but could also articulate a bold, coherent, and progressive vision for the future of the nation. Her audacious presidential campaigns, even in their predictable electoral defeat, served as a powerful, visible catalyst, relentlessly pushing the boundaries of perceived possibility and inspiring countless others, both men and women, to join the long, arduous, and ongoing fight for genuine equal rights in all spheres of American life. Her story is a potent and enduring reminder that progress towards a more just society is rarely linear, seldom easy, and often depends profoundly on the extraordinary courage and unwavering conviction of individuals willing to stand resolutely against the prevailing tide, to speak uncomfortable but necessary truths to power, and to dream of a more equitable and inclusive world even, and especially, when that dream seems impossibly distant or widely ridiculed. Belva Lockwood was, unequivocally, such an individual, a fearless forerunner, a tenacious advocate, a largely forgotten architect of American equality. She may not have lived to see all her expansive ambitions for women fully realized within her own lifetime, but she undoubtedly, and with remarkable impact, helped to lay the very foundation upon which countless future victories for women's rights and human rights would be built. She dared to run, so that others, one day, could truly win. If this is a motivation for you, or touched you, please like, subscribe, share, and comment. By History Lover.